All right, so we are live again. Hello, everybody. All right, so what we're doing today, we're going and we are listening on more history about Syria and kind of like what Syria's story is and where it all plays within the Middle East. Um, Syria has always had a interesting part inside of the Middle East. It's right there beside where Israel is, and it's right beside Turkey, right beside Jordan, close to where Iran and Iraq and all of them are. So Syria has a story to tell. And I think that we've put a lot of thought into all these other places like Egypt, Dubai, or Turkey, Iran, Jordan, Libya, but I don't hear many people talking about Syria. And here lately, Syria, I don't know. I have a mindset. I need to focus on Syria. So, and especially since I got a new president who used to be in Al Qaeda and was in Al Qaeda and helped on the overtaking of Bashar al-Assad. Yeah. So with that, give me one moment while I get other things going. And boom. And put this on Instagram. And then there we go. All right, y'all. Well, I'm not here to try to make people uncomfortable, but I am here to speak awareness. So I'm going to have people here on my Instagram that probably will not like what I'm doing right here, but it's okay because it's all about history. We're learning, guys. Isn't that what we're supposed to do here in this world? We're supposed to learn. We're not always supposed to be grooving and vibing on the dance floor. Yeah. All right, let's go. So this is the Syrian Civil War summarized. I've already been kind of watching some of it and listening to it. I got to I think it was like right around here until like the 11:30 marker. So what we're going to do, we're going to restart it. And y'all enjoy. So I will at least say this. I'm going to drop my StreamYard link down here in the chat box. So if anyone wants to come jump into this and have an open discussion, I'm completely down for an open discussion and to hear what you think and how we can make this world a better place. Because if you know me, I rock with peace, love, unity, and respect. So by doing that, you have to play a very different game. And right now, I'm not seeing the world and people really going and following into that form of motion. Let's go.
On the eve of the Arab Spring, Syria was considered one of the most oppressive countries in the world. Since 1970, the al-Assad family has ruled over Syria. First it was the father Hafez, and then his son Bashar, who became Syria's president following his father's death. Of thousands of Syrians were destroyed by state-sponsored violence and repression. Syria, under the Assad family, was a one-party state without any opposition. In a nutshell, the main power base of the Assad's rule was the coalition of the Alawites, military, and Ba'ath Party elites. When the Arab Spring spread through Tunisia, Egypt, and several other countries, Syria was initially relatively quiet. Early attempts of the Syrian people to mobilize against the government were futile, but everything changed when the security services cracked down on teenagers writing anti-regime graffiti in Dara and arrested them. For decades, Syrian society had endured crackdowns like this and much worse, and the Syrian security forces were confident that they were going to get away with it this time too. Still, the spirit of resistance spreading through the Middle East in the Arab Spring had finally arrived in the Levant as well. In mid-March 2011, mass demonstrations calling for the release of political prisoners and political reforms started throughout Syria. The regime reacted in a predictably violent manner, but protests persisted. Assad decided to use the carrot and stick approach to quell the protest movement. On the one hand, the army was now sent to defeat the protest movement, while the security services were now firing live ammunition at protesters. On the other hand, the Syrian dictator started talking about national reconciliation, the release of political prisoners, reform, and the importance of political pluralism. Evidently, the Syrian people did not trust Bashar Assad, and quite soon, his resignation and an end to the Assad regime became the key demand of the protest movement. In response, the regime's violence got only worse, with Dara, several suburbs of Damascus, and towns throughout Syria starting to be besieged by the army. And this is where cracks in the regime started to show. Some in the military started to defect, refusing to fire on peaceful protesters. Some defectors switched sides and vowed to protect the people with arms from the regime's violence. On June 4, 2011, the first armed insurrection took place in Jisr ash-Shagur, a town which saw hundreds of protesters massacred by Bashar's father in 1980. Around 100 soldiers were killed in this first major act of armed rebellion of the Syrian civil war. In July, defectors from the army announced the formation of the Free Syrian Army, with the stated aim of protecting the Syrian people from the government crackdown. In August, several major opposition groups, ranging from the Muslim Brotherhood to secular groups, came together in Istanbul to announce the formation of the Syrian National Council. The Syrian revolution was transitioning from a peaceful revolution to a full-scale civil war in response to the months-long brutal crackdown of the Assad regime. By the end of 2011, non-violent protests had transitioned into armed resistance. While the rebels initially united under the banner of the Free Syrian Army, it was by no means a monolithic group. Defectors from the Syrian army got together with some of the protesters in different cities to create the first ragtag rebel units, which were no match against the regular army. Hence, at the initial stage, the conflict resembled an insurgency. Rebels would try to ambush the Syrian army units and defend the neighborhoods they were in control of. They were particularly active in Sunni-dominated regions of the country, due to the strong resentment of the Sunnis to the Alawite-dominated rule of the Assad family. The first big battle of the civil war took place in September 2011 in Al-Rastan, and the superior firepower and the technological advantage of the Syrian regular army were sufficient to rout the rebels. Skirmishes, bombardment, ambushes, and raids were also registered in Homs, Damascus, and Idlib. Particularly heavy fighting and urban shelling of Homs by the government forces were taking place. The situation was very fluid at this point. Rebels would take control of a neighborhood, then the regime's forces would bombard them and conduct a ground assault to take over that neighborhood, only to be ambushed by a unit at a checkpoint, which would defect at that exact point. The Syrian army would sometimes have to attack the same town more than once, since right after they left after taking a town, another rebel group would emerge, or a military unit would defect, stretching the capabilities of the regime's army. Against the background of this chaotic situation, rebels controlled disconnected pockets, most notably in Idlib, Homs, and Zabadani, on the eve of the first international attempt to stop the war in Syria.
When you could use a little fatherly advice.
It's okay, all right? I'm here for you.
Don't take slow for an answer. Get optimum.
This is when it makes sense to take a step back and discuss how the main global and regional powers positioned themselves at the early stages of the Syrian war. After all, their involvement was crucial, if not outright decisive, at different stages of the civil war. The United States strongly condemned the regime's brutality against peaceful protesters right from the start, and in August 2011, President Obama called on Assad to step down. Personal sanctions against Assad and key regime leaders, and economic sanctions, including the freezing of Syrian assets, were enacted. Americans also provided non-lethal aid to the Free Syrian Army early in the war. The European Union largely followed the American lead, along with providing significant humanitarian aid to displaced Syrians. As with the intensification of the civil war, more and more Syrians started fleeing the country for Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon. A key regional actor, Turkey also supported the opposition and allowed the Free Syrian Army to use its territory. Ankara called for stronger international reaction and concrete measures to protect civilians, including a possible intervention. As thousands of Syrian refugees poured into Turkey, Prime Minister Erdogan's rhetoric became more aggressive towards Assad, as he urged the creation of no-fly zones over Syria and safe havens for refugees on its territory. After the initial attempts at mediation, the Arab League, led by Qatar and Saudi Arabia, were also very critical of Assad's crackdown against the protesters, and in November 2011, they banned Syria from the Arab League. They imposed sanctions and started providing support to the rebels. One of their key goals here was to counter Iranian influence over Syria. Shia Iran saw the Alawite Assad regime as a natural ally in the Middle East and a crucial part of its supply chain to the axis of resistance, or its proxies, depending on how you want to look at it. Iran sent its advisors from the Islamic Revolution Guards Corps to support Assad's army, while also facilitating the arrival of Hezbollah fighters to Syria. Finally, it is extremely important to examine Russia's involvement in Syria. Remember, Syria has been Moscow's ally since the Cold War. The Soviet Union has operated the Tartus naval base on the Mediterranean coast of Syria since the 1970s. Of course, later on in the war, Russia's support was crucial for the survival of Bashar Assad, but at the initial stage, Putin was more reserved. So even though he sent military aid to Assad, the full-scale Russian involvement in the Syrian civil war came several years later. But the Kremlin still gave invaluable diplomatic support to the Assad regime, along with China, at a time when it was being isolated globally. Both countries routinely vetoed any UN-sponsored action in Syria, including official condemnation, imposition of sanctions, and possibly other stronger measures. So by the time Syria became engulfed in the flames of bloody internal fighting, the global coalitions supporting the sides became evident too. The United States, the EU, Turkey, and most powerful Arab states like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which called themselves the Friends of Syria, supported the opposition and demanded Assad's resignation, while Russia, China, and Iran gave their backing to the incumbent regime. Of course, the alliances would shift throughout the war, and the opposition-backing countries would be far from acting as a unified front, since each of them pursued their narrow interests, their own often flawed vision of Syria's future, which usually manifested in supporting different rebel groups. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. In April 2012, the government and the opposition agreed to a UN-brokered ceasefire in an effort led by the former Secretary-General Kofi Annan. But this ill-fated ceasefire attempt shattered rather quickly as violence in Syria continued. In May 2012, the government violently dispersed a crowd of protesters in Al-Hula, then shelled the civilians and FSA fighters with artillery and tanks, before sending in regular army units and pro-Assad Shabiha militia to the city. More than 100 unarmed Syrians were killed in this massacre. A similar tactic was used in Al-Kabir, a village near Hama, where dozens of residents were killed by Shabihas after intense artillery shelling by the government. At this point, Assad felt that he could annihilate the opposition through brutal force and indiscriminate killing, but instead he let the genie out of the bottle. More violence led to more response from the rebels and gave more legitimacy to foreign powers to support these rebel groups. Gradually, the civil war spread. At this point, roughly 60,000 Syrian soldiers had defected, many of whom joined the Free Syrian Army. In July 2012, the battles in the two largest cities, Damascus and Aleppo, started. This is when the Assad regime started using fighter jets, bombarding the rebels and rebel-controlled civilian areas, causing indiscriminate destruction and killing. Initially, the rebels succeeded in taking over some districts in Damascus. A suicide attack killed the Syrian defense minister, Daoud Raja, and his deputy and Assad's brother-in-law, Asef Shokat. However, the government's counterattack pushed the rebel units out of the capital by early August, even though sporadic fighting in the form of insurgency continued. The Battle of Aleppo was way more protracted and would last for more than 4 years. However, at its first stage, the FSA was successful. They captured a significant portion of the city and took control of the Anadan border checkpoint, which meant that the rebels now had a direct supply line from Turkey to Aleppo. Around the same time, they captured all border checkpoints between Syria and Iraq, which facilitated the arrival of foreign fighters, including jihadists, further exacerbating the civil war. A troubling situation also started developing for the regime in the Kurdish majority regions in the north. Taking advantage of the disorder, PKK's Syrian offshoot, YPG, launched a military campaign against the government to take control of the Kurdish majority areas and declare self-rule. As the Syrian army was busy fighting the rebels in Damascus and Aleppo, the YPG took over the majority of the border strip in the north, including most of the country's oil reserves. They still control most of this territory to this day, after declaring the autonomous administration of Rojava. Despite their setback in Damascus, by late 2012, the rebel groups had momentum on the battlefield. They had captured most of the Deir ez-Zor governorate and parts of the city of Deir ez-Zor, the biggest in eastern Syria. In November, they seized Sarakya, a strategic city on the M5 highway, connecting all key Syrian cities, Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and Damascus. Further gains were made in the Aleppo, Idlib, and Hama governorates. The rebel area of control in and around the capital Damascus was expanded too, with the capture of Douma and Yarmouk. For the first time in the civil war, the rebels made notable gains inside the Alawite majority Latakia governorate. The situation looked extremely problematic for Assad, and it seemed like his army and regime were being cornered by the rebels. By late 2012, they had lost all of Syria's north and most.
Alright, so with what you've heard, you can just tell that the Middle East has had nothing but conflict within each other. There's always been someone trying to rise up to power or can't stand with what the government is doing, or you have rebel groups that get formed to get created. And then I'm realizing us sitting here over here in America, we have it so much easier. We think that life is hard for us. But over here, life is completely different. We get a luxury. I've got cameras, I've got GoPros, I've got a computer, and I'm not saying that people over there don't have that, but it's there's people that have to wake up every morning and they're feared for their life because they don't know if something is going to happen, or there's going to be terrorist group that comes in and just wipes out their whole city. Like over here, we don't have to worry about that. We worry about dumpsters, or if the trash people didn't take our trash, or oh my gosh, this person parked too close to my side of the street. That's the things that happen over here in America that people complain about. We're not sitting here wondering and worrying about the things that are going on over there. We're worrying about what's going on over here. Now, granted, that's great, but whenever it starts showing out into our homelessness and the people that don't have the money to take care of themselves, and they get pushed out into the streets, and they can go up on drugs, they can go into institutions, they can end up in jail, or they can go 6 feet under. That's what we deal with here in America. But over there in Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Turkey, Israel, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Mexico, all these places, they've had nothing but conflict for thousands of years. So I do put myself into their shoes. If I was to be over there, how would my mindset be? And you just view other people like, okay, so I hate to say this, and I don't want to disrespect anyone wearing suits or any of that, but whenever you saw Trump get off of the plane of Air Force One, and he saw the Saudi Arabian prince, they're in robes. They are looking fancy. They're looking like supreme, majestic leaders. And then you got us, United States, Europe, Germany, Turkey, all of them wearing suits and a tie. And I just see the difference. I don't know. There's just something about suits and robes. Who tries to seem like they're the bigger honchos, or we're more elegant? I don't like to look at it. If anything, I think the robes are fancy. I think they're amazing. Like how they're able to make their shawls, their I don't even know. I'm not even going to try to act like I know the words that I'm trying to say here, because I don't. No, I just kind of put myself in their shoes, and what have they had to deal with compared if over here for my 30 years, nothing compared to what's been going on over there. But I don't know, because I've never been there. I can only see with what media shows me, and all I've ever seen over here in the Middle East is destruction, is chaos, disillusion with each other. Like, And I mean, it kind of shows, if you were sitting here listening, you can tell, like, a lot of people go against each other and they rise up and create different faction groups, like the rebels, the Kurds, and we're going to be getting into more. There's more groups that have been within the history of this side of the world. We're just learning and taking a dive into the Middle East history, and we're seeing what goes on. So I don't know. It's still weird to do this. This is not necessarily what I was thinking was gonna start taking place in my life for the 2025 year. I've always done and talked about things and done it on my phone or do it on my GoPro. But I haven't really done it where I just sit on my mic and I show y'all the video. I've had a couple people tell me, they're like, you just need to show the proof. You need to show it. Like, you want to make it more convincing for people, right? Show it. I don't want to do that because then if you see my different side of me, but regardless, I think people are going to see the other side of me, whether they like it or not. So, yeah. Let's get back into this and let's learn more history.
Coast of the East. Rebels had control of the border with Turkey and Iraq.
Right back.
They had captured significant territories in and around Damascus, Aleppo, and Homs. But the armed opposition had one significant flaw. It was disorganized, without a proper central command. Initially, the Free Syrian Army consisted of 22 separate armed factions, but over time it grew. The problem was that the FSA leadership was in Turkey and had little influence over events happening on the ground in Syria. Communication was a major problem.
Nature calls.
Moreover, even though these groups on paper accepted operating under the FSA umbrella, their origins, ideology, geography of operations, and many other factors made them de facto independent. By mid-2012, when the rebels were getting the upper hand on the battlefield, they consisted of 4 main groups: Liwa al-Islam, which later became Jaish al-Islam, operating in Damascus, Sugur al-Sham and Kataib al-Ra al-Sham in Idlib, and Liba al-Tawhid in Aleppo. All were Islamist groups, but all of them besides Kataib al-Shah al-Sham operated under the FSA umbrella. In September 2012, Liwa al-Islam, Liwa al-Tawhid, and Sugur al-Sham announced the creation of the Syrian Islamic Liberation Front, SILF, within the FSA. These groups made up around half of the entire FSA, which meant that the FSA leadership in Turkey was losing further influence over events in Syria. Later in December 2012, 11 other groups, including Ra al-Sham, created the Syrian Islamic Front, weakening the FSA even more. In December 2012, the Friends of Syria group gathered 260 armed opposition groups in Antalya to create a unified command, and the result was the Supreme Military Council, SMC. It helped the Syrian opposition to gain more international legitimacy, hence the increased foreign military and financial aid. According to Charles Lister, the CIA used the SMC network to facilitate the small-scale delivery of weapons in early 2013 to groups which were vetted as more reliable. But most of the weapon deliveries from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey were still carried out by using personal contacts within rebel groups. So instead of organizing centralized arms delivery, the foreign actors backing the opposition in Syria chose to work directly with the organizations and people they knew. This caused competition for resources among the rebel groups and further deteriorated the spirit of cooperation among them. The FSA and the secular opposition were failing to assert themselves, while their governance in areas under their control left a lot to be desired. And this left a lot of space for the jihadist groups to exploit. An FSA commander in Hama said this: "Al-Nusra really took advantage of the Free Army's failure to control territory effectively and to help the people justly. That's why we now have to deal with Al-Nusra as a fait accompli." Jabhat al-Nusra is the affiliate of Al-Qaeda in Syria, and in 2012 they came to the forefront of the Syrian civil war as a very organized and potent military force. It was led by none other than Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Jalani. In early 2013, they captured the Taftanaz airbase in Idlib, seizing a significant amount of equipment, including tanks, helicopters, and rocket launchers. In March 2013, the rebels, led by al-Nusra and Ra al-Sham, achieved an important success by capturing their first provincial capital, Raqqa. We have already mentioned the gross human rights abuses carried out by the Assad regime, but the rebels, particularly the jihadist groups, did their own fair share of abhorrent acts too. For instance, the capture of Raqqa was followed by persecution, killing, and displacement.
So I actually have to stop this live for a little bit. Daddy duty calls to go and do my daddy duties. I will be back around 9:30, 9:45, and we'll get right back to what we're doing. But we will do a different video. So this is a little piece of information about the Syrian civil war. Maybe we'll start learning about Turkey next. Learn about Turkey, and then soon enough, we'll learn about Israel and Iran, and we're gonna see just why, maybe just why, there's so much conflict between those two nations. So, y'all stay tuned, and we will be back later. All right, peace, much love.